wonder what it would look like for us to do a trust fall with God. I wonder what that would look like for you in your everyday life, in the little decisions or the big decisions, to trust God with them. I wonder what that would look like. And I wonder what that looks like when like life is telling us that we need to have a stable income, we need to have a 10-year plan, we need to be self-sufficient. And all of these things can be good and right. But my challenge today is, if we are putting our trust in these things and not allowing God to lead us, then the challenge is simple. Why not? Why are we not trusting God how he calls us to trust him? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. What would it look like for us to have maybe this 10-year plan, a stable career, but also go where God calls us to go? And to stay where God calls us to stay and move when God calls us to move. I wonder what that would look like. So I'm going to tell a bit of my story now, being a bit more of a light-hearted sermon. So I'm going to tell you a bit about my story and a bit about my story of trusting God. So I was born in Balaclava, would you believe? I'm actually a country boy. I didn't always look like a city kid. I am also a country boy. And being born in a family who loved God was really, really influential to my life. And I grew up with a Bible on our dining room table, and every morning I would wake up and my dad is there reading the Bible. And my sister's here at the moment, she just nodded her head, because that was our reality. Like God was in a part of my morning, and we wake up and I know I would go sit next to Dad and just like really annoy him as he was reading his Bible, and he was like, "Go away, Tim, go away." The little chuckle there, that was so 100% genuine. I definitely did that. But faith was modeled to me at a really young age, and I really honor and respect my parents for that. And it was really, really a pivotal point for me just to look at them and say, yeah, I want that. So I'm also a carpenter by trade as well. So I finished my carpentry apprenticeship a couple of years ago. And yes, I know I'm a carpenter and a pastor. It's very biblical. Yes, I know. Be like Jesus, I took that a bit too hard. So, what can I say? But God called me into carpentry at a very, very young age, which was really cool. This was the first time that I heard God's voice. He said, I want you to be a carpenter and I want you to be a pastor. And I was like, okay, sure, let's do it. And so I did that, tried and tested it, and God was like, yep, this is where I want you. So a few years passed in my life, in my childhood. I finished school, and then I completed a discipleship course in New Zealand. So I was over there for 6 months doing a discipleship course in a church over there, which is actually where my now brother-in-law is from, because my sister did the same course, came back with a man. I didn't come back with a fiance. I have recently got a fiance, but that, yeah, another little fun side story. So after coming back from New Zealand, I was like, all right, now it's time to look for a job. Time to look for a carpentry apprenticeship. And I was like, cool, this will come easy because God's called me to it. I know that God's called me to be a carpenter, and I was like, all right, this is going to be fun. So I started applying for jobs, and applying for jobs, and applying for more jobs, and making more phone calls, and more phone calls, and more phone calls. And then 6 months later, after all of these phone calls, after I've talked to every builder that I could think of, every builder that had an operation in the north of Adelaide, no one wanted an apprentice. No one wanted an apprentice. And so after 6 months of looking, I eventually came across this builder through this building company, and he was like, yep, all right, cool. I'll come in, we'll come in, we'll do some work experience, and then I'll have a think about it. I didn't hear back from this guy after doing this work experience for like 3 weeks. And I was like, oh, well, that was just a waste of time. And then I did another one where another bit of work experience, And then I actually got offered 2 jobs on the same day after 6 months of looking, which was crazy, absolutely crazy. So in January, I started this apprenticeship. 5 months later, I go to work one Monday morning, and I sit in the truck, I'm about to go, and the boss didn't normally come to work with me. He normally would drive his own ute. And he was in the work van with me, and I'm like, this is weird. And then he sits me down and he says, unfortunately, I don't have enough work for you. I'm going to have to let you go. And I was like, what? After 5 months of looking, this is like a full year after I started looking for a job, and after 5 months of working for this guy, I now have no job? I'm like, God, what? God, you've called me to this. There is such a strong calling in my life to be a carpenter, and now I'm without an apprenticeship again. And there was this whole internal dialect in my head, and I was like, did I choose the wrong apprenticeship? Because I had to make that choice of which job to go for. And so I cried out to God. And it was really hard for me to see God's plan for my life in this time. It was really hard. Because I feel like everything had just been ripped away from me. Everything that God had promised me had been ripped away from me. I didn't understand, and I was feeling really let down and questioning why God would let this happen to me if this is what he wanted me to do. It just made no sense. So I doubted God's plan, and everything was moving in such a good direction, and then it was pulled away. And I thought that since it was the same time of year that when I lost my job, when I didn't have a job the first time, I was like, oh, this is going to take me another 6 months to find a job. I was like, well, settle in, let's make a heap more phone calls, send a heap more resumes out. It's not really ever fun when you have to update your resume. I don't know if anyone's ever had to do that, but updating your resume, you just know, unless it's for a good reason, but this was not a good reason. I was like, oh, this sucks. I've done 5 months of a carpentry apprenticeship. And so I began looking, and within 3 weeks, I had another carpentry apprenticeship. But this carpentry apprenticeship was not in the northern suburbs. It was not in the north of Adelaide. It was not in the north. It was actually in Adelaide. And Adelaide was a place that I never wanted to live. Little country boy Tim was like, I do not want to live in Adelaide. I'm a country boy through and through. I want to drive a D-Max. I want to just live it up. I want dirt everywhere. I don't want to get this city slicker yuck on me. But then God was like, nah. Here is where I want you to be. Here is where I want you to be. And it was such a God thing and a God reason the way that I got this job. And I'm so blessed that after 3 weeks of looking for this job the second time, God was so faithful. And let me also say this, that trusting God brought me to Adelaide. It brought me to Clovie. And I am so glad, and I completely understand why God brought me to Adelaide now, why God brought me to living in Adelaide, to spending my life in Adelaide. I completely understand that now. And I've grown in trust because God had a very different plan for my life than I had for it. But I just had to say yes to God's plan. I just had to trust God in the big decisions as much as the little decisions. And I had this plaque, right? This plaque that was given to me at such a young age, and it has the verse on it. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And so some of you may know this verse as a Colin song. Some of you may also know this verse because it's a very well-known verse. And the verse goes like this: trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understandings. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Trusting God led me to so many things. And this plaque that I had really, really lifted me up. So whenever I was doubting, whenever I was sitting at my desk in Balaclava looking for jobs on all the job application websites, I would look at this plaque and it says, trust in me. Lean not on your own understandings. And that was really hard because I didn't have any reason to trust God. I didn't have any motive to trust God other than trust. Trust in this moment was a decision, not a feeling. Trust in this moment was a decision and not a feeling. For trust and for this, having control was such a big part of my life. And I have a fear of man-made heights, which is such a weird thing to have a fear of being a carpenter, because I'm up on a roof and I'm like 6 meters in the air and I'm not scared up there. But I have a fear of man-made heights. And for example, one time we were on a Ferris wheel at the Adelaide show, and my parents always tell the story of me because it's a time when I was the most fearful I have ever been in my life. And my gosh, was it scary. And then my sister was rocking the cage. Not this one, a different sister. My oldest sister, Rebecca, was rocking this cage of the Ferris wheel. And I was like, no, stop, I'm so scared. And it was terrifying because I was not in control. And so I found it super hard to let go, and to let go of my plans and my ideas for my life, and to let God guide and move in my life. I found that really, really hard. And I wonder if that's where we're at today. I wonder if that's where anyone's at today. Whether we're so in love with being in control that we struggle to let go and let God. And this proverb that was on my plaque, which is the proverb of trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understandings, it helped me to trust God and to see what it can look like. And it was definitely a scary time to letting go and trusting God, and it was a continual thing. I had to continue letting go and to continue trusting God. It wasn't a once-off trusting God. And I ask us this question today. Is our trust a feeling, or is our trust a decision? Is our trust a feeling, or is it a decision? Are we making a decision to trust God, or are we leaving that decision up to our feelings? Whether we feel like trusting God today, whether we feel like doing this, or are we making a decision saying, a once-off decision saying, God, I'm going to trust you with my finances, with my family, with my job, with my career? Are we giving that to God and saying, God, I trust you in that? Or are we just trusting God when it feels right? When things are going well for us, we're like, oh yeah, I trust God. Or are we down in the dump? When we're down in the dumps, are we still saying, God, I trust you? God, I trust you. I wonder what that looks like. Now, in this passage in Proverbs as well, it talks about, in Proverbs 3, it talks about this. There are 5 warnings in the start of Proverbs 3. And there are 5 blessings of wisdom and 5 prohibitions. Now, I find it interesting in this passage that we're looking at today in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It's in the 5 warnings category of this proverb. And it's not a fluffy thing, trusting in God. It's not oh yeah, we'll trust in God. It's fine. We'll trust. And it's actually a warning. It's actually a warning against leaning on our own understandings. It's a warning that if we lean on our own understandings and trust God, it's not going to be good. We may think it's good, but God has such a better plan for us. It's a warning against thinking we've got it all. It's a warning against self-sufficiency, thinking we know it all and trying to do it all ourselves and to be a guide for our own life. It's a warning against this. This passage could be paraphrased like this. It could be paraphrased like, trust God more than yourself. Trust God more than yourself. Now, trusting God isn't always easy. It's not always easy. And there are times in life where it can just seem too hard, when bad things happen, when we struggle with sickness, when people around us struggle with sickness, when our finances aren't looking how we thought they would, how we want them to look, when people pass away that we are dear to, when there is war and when there is suffering, when we see things that aren't around us that are happening that aren't good, when we see anxiety and depression running rampant through society, when it seems like there's no end to this, trusting God can be so hard. Can be so hard. But when these things happen, how can we bring ourselves back to trusting God? How can we trust God no matter what? How can we trust God with the decision, not a feeling? How can our trust in God be so true and so large and so faithful that it's a decision and not a feeling? And I wonder today what that looks like for us, what that looks like for each of us in our own lives. So ask us, what would it look like to take a trustful with God? What would it look like to lean back into God today? I wonder what that would look like for us. In your life, I wonder, what step of faith do we need to take to trust God? What would it look like to surrender control of our own lives to God? And even though I tell my story of the way that I've trusted God, there are still areas in my life that I need to trust God in more. There are still areas in my life where I trust myself more than I trust God. It's a journey. It's a journey to keep trusting God more and more and more. And it doesn't matter where we're at in our faith journey. It's whether we trust God with a little bit, whether we trust God with a lot. God is calling us to trust Him more. Let me pray. God, I want to thank You for being faithful. Lord, for being faithful no matter what's going on in our lives, God. Lord, trusting You can be so hard sometimes. Lord, when we see all of this darkness and despair in our lives, Lord, in the lives of those around us, Lord. Lord, it can be so hard to trust You sometimes. But God, I pray that trust would grow in each of us, Lord. Lord, that we would learn to trust You, God. Lord, with a decision, not a feeling. Lord, that we would trust You with the big things in our lives, Lord, the little things in our lives, Lord. Lord, trust You with our finances. Lord, trust You with our home loan. Lord, trust You with our family, God. Lord, I pray that we can trust You with all of these things, Lord, and more. Lord, help us to make the hard decision sometimes, or the decision that sometimes doesn't seem right. Lord, that doesn't seem right in our own mind, Lord, but help us to trust You. Help us to leave our own plans, God, and go after Your plans, God. Thank You, Lord.